Welcome to part 2 of my work in progress piece. I'm still working on the wireframe structure of Cyclone. This wireframe drawing will end up printed onto my Bristol board, where I can then finish the piece traditionally from there. Essentially making the clean structure drawing here in in Photoshop that will save me from having to do all that thinking, all that hard work on the paper itself. So this is like a big shortcut. It's a very highly useful layout tool. And here I'm double checking by flipping the piece in reverse to make sure that I have proportions that are correct. Sometimes looking at something in reverse will reveal odd layout problems or structure problems. And there I was also checking to make sure I wasn't making her foot a little, too large. I think I ended up scaling it down a little bit. And here I am creating the laces for that back shoe. I just noticed that all of the names in the layers palette are probably pretty hard to read here. They're not that important. I try to keep my Photoshop files very organized by keeping everything labeled properly. But the proportions, unfortunately the proportions that I work at with a really tall, thin monitor that's essentially 11 by 17 itself is the center monitor, and then I have a smaller monitor on either side of it. Here you can see a little bit of the right-hand monitor, which has the layers palette on it. That's a pretty... unfortunately, that's a bad proportion to show like on a YouTube video, where everything is more horizontal proportion. The video itself is more like 16 by 9 proportions. But it's not that important to see the layers palette. Just know, if you're working in Photoshop, I would highly recommend that you keep your layers labeled properly. That way it'll, you know what you're drawing on. You don't accidentally go, oh, oops, I've been drawing on the wrong layer for the last 20 minutes or something. Because that's happened to me. That's what taught me that lesson. Here I've deleted some of the undersketching layers that I didn't need anymore. That way I could see, I got rid of whenever I was sketching the shoes, got rid of that and a light blue hue saturation adjustment layer, so I could see the further down undersketches like this arm and stuff. And again, I'm just kind of cartooning out her hand. It's like, I honestly don't know if a human hand would look just like this at this angle, but it reads as if it's a hand, so that's what's, that's important. It's anatomically correct enough that it equals a hand at that angle, and that's what I'm really concerned with. It's the silhouette or the shape of it reads as a hand, at that kind of obscure angle. That's all. I just need it to read as if it's a hand. I don't need it to be exactly photorealistic. At this point, I've essentially outlined the core anatomy of Cyclone's figure, the shape or silhouette of her body, and now I'm moving in to fill in the internal details. I oftentimes think of what would make for a good shape or silhouette of the figure that reads dynamically and that you can still understand. There's a lot of information out there in both comic book reference material online or in books that talks about what equates to a strong silhouette. There's also a lot of, that term is also used in animation a lot. What it essentially is, you can look this up, and I encourage you to do that, but what it essentially is it essentially means that if even just at a glance you can look at the figure and understand where all the limbs are all at once. If you were to, for example, move a camera right in front of somebody as they're standing there doing a martial arts pose, and you can see all their hands, you know, all their arms and legs. That will read very easily to you, whereas if you're doing it from an obscure angle, like from directly on top of their body or underneath their body, there might be, you know, the camera won't see some of those limbs. Like they'll basically, you know, part of the torso might be blocking where their left or right arm is, and then your brain has, you know, takes a second to register, now, you know, what is the body doing again? You want to pick a pose, you know, more often than not, you want to use poses that the brain immediately picks up on. I would have to do like an entire sort of tutorial on this sort of thing to fully make sense, so maybe that's something I'll do in the future, but, you know, that's one of the reasons I chose this pose, was that it's easy to read what her body is doing. Here I'm using a path of Cyclone's chest symbol that I used in the comic all the time. It is, you know, like, it's based off of Alex Ross's original design for the little twirl shape that equals her chest symbol. That way it's always consistent, I don't have to draw it from scratch every time. And here I've filled it with white and stroked it on its own layer, then I've duplicated that layer to create a three-dimensional look for that logo. Like by duplicating it and then erasing some of the foreground layer, it kind of makes it look like it has some depth there. Cyclone has like a short, kind of a semi-short skirt. I mean, it's cut in a way that kind of goes up on a V on either side of her hip, but then she has like long briefs on, and then there's some, you know, from her upper thigh to the mid thigh, she has like bare skin and then long stockings. In color, it makes a lot more sense. Like here, it almost, you know, you're not sure exactly until I get into the rendering stage, basically. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on with that, but there's a lot of stripes there. But it equals basically briefs and then long stockings with a little bit of a section of skin there that kind of breaks that up. Here I'm drawing her skirt that I want to make as fluid looking as possible. It's important though to keep cloth looking different than the hair, so it might take on a little bit of a similar shape at times. I don't want to get so rambunctious with the shape or contour of the cloth that it reads as if it's hair, or the hair reads as if it's cloth. I'm using larger flowing lines for the cloth than I am with the hair. The hair is a little bit more tangled up to differentiate the texture of it. Here I'm double checking by going in reverse to make sure that my composition's not too heavy. What I think I remember noticing at this point was her, you know, the skirt looked like it was coming off the side of her body, and instead of, you know, all around the back of her. So I fixed that, and I think I also noticed there wasn't enough hair coming out of the back of her head. It looked, you know, it almost looked like she had incredibly long bangs, but not enough hair coming out of the back. And now it's time for the monkey. I had drawn Frank quite a few times in JSA All-Stars, so I didn't need to use a lot of reference. And again, I'm not trying to hit a photorealistic monkey. So here I'm just going off of memory by what he looked like. Frank has like a little vest on, which I think is a cute, it's a fun thing to draw. And then he's got like cardboard wings that are just like sewn onto the vest, essentially. So the wings are not functional wings at all. They're just meant to look like he's a flying monkey, basically. I was about to try to freehand draw, you know, his fist, his semi-loose fist there, but I decided to just go ahead and sketch it out. Another luxury of working digitally. And part of it is because I wanted to, you know, I wanted his, like, if you look at a monkey, their fingers have much more knobby finger joints, so I didn't want to make his hands too petite looking. Wanted to give him big, big sort of joints, basically. Another fun thing about drawing monkeys is what is essentially having 4 hands. The structure of their feet is a little different than a hand, but the 4 primary fingers are essentially the same, with a thumb that's set back further, more out of the side of the foot as compared to a normal hand. But it's fun because you can be very articulate. You can have them doing all sorts of things, gripping stuff with their feet, basically. It's a fun thing to have as an option when you're drawing things. Just can add more visual interest. It's one of the reasons I think people enjoy drawing Beast from the X-Men, or Monkey Man from Monkey Man and O'Brien, from that's Arthur Adams' Dark Horse create-her-own book. It's just fun to draw that sort of where they're gripping a book with their feet or something like that. Here's another example of using like a strong silhouette, making sure that Frank's tail doesn't disappear behind his own back or his arm or his wing too much. You can see in quotes, a through line of that tail, so that it will still read as a tail that's attached to him, and not like a piece of hair that's coming from Cyclone, or part of her wind power. Whenever I get to that, you can tell all the different parts of his body. They're not combining together in an indiscernible clump or something. Funny story, whenever I was drawing the cover to the first issue of JSA All-Stars, I had drawn Frank, I'm not sure exactly why, but I drew him like the size of half the size of a normal monkey. We went to press with preview images of him at that size, and then in San Diego Con of that year, which was 2009 or 10, whatever it was, there was all these comments of why is the monkey so small? My honest response to that would be, oh, oops, I didn't realize I had drawn him so small. It just didn't occur to me, I guess, because stuff like that just, I wasn't used to drawing monkeys at the time, so I didn't even think about it. So I went back in and adjusted the size of him. I just about doubled his size on the cover, and he still ends up looking a little small on that first cover, but much better in the printed version of the cover on the actual comic. He looks much better than in the preview images. Here I'm into the wind power that she is generating. Cyclone has the ability to create cyclones, hence her name, but I wanted the wind to look like she was essentially creating a vortex where there was some foreground wind that was kind of overlapping the clouds that she's creating behind it. Here I'm double checking all the different sketch layers to see if I had sketched in any like vortex lines around her legs. If I had, I must have deleted them or something like that, because then I just decided, oh, I'll just draw them here, for the first time or whatever. And I'm creating like a through line to show direction, and then kind of creating the puffy, cloud lines on top of it as shorthand to myself on, where I want the whirlwind to be. I wanted to make sure that although there was a direction of the clouds or of the wind power, I wanted to make sure I didn't make it so detailed or so many. See, I didn't want so many tight overlapping lines that your attention was drawn there too much. It's just supposed to balance the composition, bring your eye back up into Cyclone from the bottom of the page. And I didn't want it to be distracting, in other words. If you add lots of detail to background elements, sometimes the reader's eye can be distracted or get lost in those areas. So I didn't want to go too far with this, so I was actually thinking of it probably a little harder than I needed to, especially because I eventually just went really light with these lines, and I didn't add nearly as much detail as I was kind of agonizing over. But the key I find to drawing clouds or wind power is to think of cotton balls that, you know, have really bumpy areas and then have areas in the middle that are smooth. Just look at, you know, some really puffy clouds, like if you're on a plane or something like that. Those are, you know, that's what you want to try to emulate. And actually in the comic, I'm just remembering this, I oftentimes would draw the, whenever Cyclone would use her cyclonic powers, her abilities, it would oftentimes override her legs, like it would, you know, make her legs basically invisible behind the cyclone of air that she was riding on. But that makes for a little less of an interesting pinup sort of image. And here I wanted to show her entire figure. So she's still somehow aloft. I guess she's made like a pillowy undercushion. That's how she's floating or something. And here I'm getting pretty close to the end. I felt like I was pleased with how things were going, and then realized two things. One was that her foreground hand was not outstretched quite as much as I wanted, and then the other thing was that I needed to indicate where she was going to, you know, her pupils, basically, where her iris and pupil would be. Here's like a final check of me flipping the composition to make sure I had everything where I wanted it to, and also realized I needed to, you know, block out where I had drawn through Frank. And sometimes I use like a cardboard cutout JavaScript. If you're interested in that, you can, you know, it's on my channel. But here I just did a quick and dirty, you know, knockout layer that made things underneath Frank disappear, you know, and then filled in where the lines kind of overlapped or whatever on Frank, so that he looked like he was in front of Cyclone. Here it was time to add her eyes. This is like a quick sketch line to make sure I had the shape. A mistake some artists will use is to, you know, to use an exact circle for the irises, and that's not the way to go. They look kind of robotic when you do that. It's better to have, you know, there's some, you know, the human eye is not a perfect sphere, it's more of an egg shape, so there's a certain ovalness to the eye, to the iris part that can be expressive, and it's something to keep in mind. Oh, and even at this stage I was figuring I needed to take out some of the angular nature of her jaw, just to make it, you know, a little softer. It's knocking out some of those foreground wind lines, like I was saying before, kind of breaking them up so that they are not as distracting. You have long fluid lines. One, it looks a little more digital, and two, if you break it up a little bit, they become a little less noticeable, a little less visible. Looked like I was having some trouble here with the stocking lines. Like, you want to give some dimensionality to the, you know, the stocking lines. The more straight you make them, the more flat her leg contours will look. So it's important to get the shape of the curved lines on the stocking correct, so that she, you know, you're not creating an odd shape contour to the legs. Some last minute adjustment of the composition in relationship to the artboard template. I think at this point, this is the, yeah, I finally decided her hand was not stretched out quite far enough, that it needed to be out a little bit more, so I just moved it to its own layer, and then moved it out to the side. Okay, so that is the finished wireframe drawing, which is what I'll print out onto my artboard, and then traditionally finish from there. To be continued in part 3,